how they will meet their commitment to provide $100 billion a year of climate finance to developing nations. And during, of course, the opening plenary, we also adopted the COP26 agenda. And I have to say that we do have an unprecedented negotiations agenda, and I have called on negotiators to make as much progress as possible on the technical elements before ministers engage during the second week. And I think we all understand that time is of the essence. And so at COP26, I'm calling on countries to work together to mobilize finance, to increase action to adapt to climate impacts, to complete the Paris Rulebook after 6 years, and accelerate action this decade to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. And I hope at the World Leaders Summit on the 1st and 2nd of November, we will see further commitments that help build the confidence and conviction that we can keep global warming limited towards 1.5 degrees. In parallel, as you will be aware, the G20 is reaching its conclusions. And throughout my presidency, I have championed the position of the climate vulnerable countries, the developing nations, and I have called for the G20 to play their part. Ultimately, this is a group of nations that represents 80% of global emissions, and therefore, whilst we all must play our part, they can make, or indeed break, the hope of keeping 1.5 within reach. I have to say, I am cautiously hopeful about what I'm hearing from Rome, but we'll see where the discussions and deliberations end up. I know the discussions have not been easy. Climate action is a large and complex challenge, and one meeting, so whether it's the G20 or indeed a COP, isn't going to be able to address everything. But countries are clear-sighted on the urgency of the science, and the need to accelerate action this decade is firmly on the agenda for leaders and negotiators here in Glasgow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hand over to the Executive Secretary, please.
Thank you very much. And I will not repeat what has been so well said by the COP President. Let me start by expressing on behalf of UN Climate Change Secretariat, but I believe also on behalf of the wider membership of the Conference of the Parties, our deep gratitude for the incredible work that the UK government has deployed in order to allow us to be here meeting today in person. This is really the first big UN gathering after the pandemic started. So it is really significant. And in this regard, I also want to thank all of you for being here. I am conscious that for you, it was also not easy to travel here and to go through all the different processes that are needed in order to ensure that we have a safe and healthy environment for us all. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your continuous interest in allowing us to spread the word of what we are doing here. I want also to mention this morning the Minister of Environment of Chile. She made her statement, her final statement, handing over the presidency to President Alok Sharma. So it was also a very important and I would say also maybe an emotional moment. She has held the longest presidency ever in our process for very specific circumstances. So we are here, yes, in a very crucial moment. We have different signals. On the one side, the presence here of 120 leaders, it just indicates how much the issue of climate change is really at the top of the priority at the highest level. So that is, I would say, reassuring. That's really important that we register that. On the other hand, it is true, we know that we are still far from where we need to be to say confidently that we will reach the 1.5 degrees goal by the end of the century. However, the science also tells us that it is still within our reach. So I would say, if you ask me, why are you optimistic? I think that from what we are learning and seeing, we know that this transformation can happen, that there are the tools, there are instruments, there are solutions. It is a question of time. And also on how we manage to replicate those solutions at the speed that is required, so that in this decade, which is crucial, we can get to be confident about achieving the 1.5 degree goal. So I have seen the delegation. I came here to Glasgow actually a week ago, and I've been meeting with different groups and negotiators. So I can tell you, I see, yes, there are differences of views, but what is reassuring is that I see a unity of purpose. People really wanting to work together in order to achieve a successful outcome here at COP26. Now, it's difficult. Yes, it is going to be difficult. But remember, some years ago, we were still discussing really whether this was what we needed to do. We were still discussing whether there was or actually not even discussing, there were many who thought that there is a path to development that is not sustainable. So they thought they had a choice between sustainable development or not. Today, this is not the case. So I think we have made progress, but yes, as the co-president has mentioned, we have a huge task ahead of us. I can tell you that we will be working alongside and under the leadership of the co-president to support parties in succeeding by the 12th of November, when I hope we all can go home and be happy about the results.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary. We now take questions. So if I may ask you here in the room to raise your hands. On the virtual platform, please do the same. Use the raise hand function, and I will find you and I will call you up, and then you will be brought into the room here. Let me start here, first row.
Seth Borenstein, Associated Press. From Ms. Espinosa, the G20, there are some who said there was a failure of leadership, that there was no big push that came out, maybe a little small push. How would you characterize what came out, especially considering what some considered a weak NDC from China? Are you starting this COP with only a small amount of momentum, and how will that affect negotiations? Does it hurt negotiations not getting that big push?
Well, I have to say that I have not yet had a chance to look in detail to the outcome of the G20. Yes, and you may have heard me before saying that as the President has just said, G20 really has a very important role to play. And our NDC synthesis report indicates that we are not there. We are looking at ways of updating it further in order to bring in at least be able to highlight what are what is their last assessment with those NDCs that just came, including the one from China. You know, I think, yes, very frankly, we are not where we need to be. And I think that's something that we need to be very honest about. We are seeing that altogether, our assessment indicates around 16% of increase of emissions by 2030, while we should be getting to a decrease of 45%. That is a fact. Now, what I do see, and I engage very intensely with G20 countries, including China, and probably especially China, is that there is a strong determination to really fulfill the commitments that they are making. And so China is now saying that they will be peaking their emissions before 2030. Of course, I hope that they can succeed, and we can encourage them to come to bring that date forward as much as possible. And in some cases also, and knowing the realities of some of these countries, it is no doubt challenging. These huge populations, very complex social, cultural, political realities. Nobody is really, we cannot think that the transformation will happen from one day to the other. But what we do want to see is that there is the utmost effort made every day. And for that, I think that we need to go into the next phase of our work, hopefully with a very successful outcome here, in constantly looking for areas of opportunity to increase the ambitions under the NDCs.
Thank you. Next question, the lady in the first row, please.
Thank you. Ivana Kutasova from CNN. Mr. President, how has the energy crisis affected your expectations coming into this COP? Specifically, what is your ambition on the end of coal? We are hearing from Rome that several large countries are pushing very hard against a specific date for the end of coal use. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think the first thing to say is that obviously the energy issues that we're facing are of international nature. However, I think what we also need to look at what needs to happen over the next few years in the medium term as well in terms of decarbonizing our economies and our power sectors. And I've certainly been encouraged by the moves by many countries to make a big push on renewables. We mentioned China earlier. China now in its NDC has put a target of renewables by 2030 of 1,200 gigawatts. We see similar significant targets in countries like India, which wants to get to 450 gigawatts by 2030 as well. I think what these recent events have shown is that we need to accelerate the move to clean power. We have an Energy Transition Council, which we've set up as part of the work on COP26. There are a significant number of governments represented on that, and the intention of that is to find common solutions and, of course, also support countries as part of their energy transition. On the issue of coal, I said at the start of when I took on this role as COP President-designate that we wanted to make COP26 the COP that we had to consign coal power to history. And I would just say to all colleagues here that what has happened over the past months, I think, has been quite remarkable in terms of the commitments to end international coal financing. So I co-chaired the meeting of G7 energy and climate and energy environment ministers back in May. We had a historic commitment then that all the G7 nations would no longer finance international coal. South Korea has made the same commitment. I visited South Korea on 2 occasions. This was a topic for discussion. And then, of course, you have seen China very significantly state at the UN General Assembly, President Xi Jinping stated that China would also be ending international coal financing. And if this press conference had been taking place a year ago, and I had said to you that that is how far we would have come, I suspect you might have been skeptical. But that is where we are, and I think we are at this point where, when it comes to international coal financing, we are consigning coal to history. Let's see what comes out of the G20 in terms of domestic coal. I've always said that every country starts from a different energy mix, but ultimately pushing forward on clean power is something that benefits each country individually and us collectively as an international community.
Thank you. Thais, the lady here in the first row, please.
Thank you. Thais Lara from Redacción in Argentina. For the president of the COP, during the pre-COP, Argentina and other countries present the proposal to create a committee to define the financial architecture to mobilize the necessary climate finance. I would like to know the position of the COP presidency on that and if it's going to be considered during these weeks. And also, we know there's rules regarding the pandemic that we need to follow, but how the transparency and inclusion of the process will be guaranteed for the people in person during these 2 weeks. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. May I just make a overall point on climate finance, because of course the 100 billion has become very much a totemic figure, and it's become a matter of trust for developing nations particularly. And that's why I was extremely keen that we look to put together a delivery plan on the 100 billion. And I'm very grateful to Minister Jochen Flashbart from the German government and Minister Jonathan Wilkinson from the Canadian government for the very good work that they did together with the UK presidency in putting together the delivery plan. Alongside that delivery plan, the OECD also published an analysis report which is pretty detailed, and if colleagues have not yet seen it, I would certainly suggest that you have a look at it. What that delivery plan sets out is that the 100 billion will be met, I think, with some confidence in 2023, and then over the period 2021 to 2025, 500 billion plus will be mobilized. And the reason that I say with some confidence, and in fact we may get there earlier, because there is still an opportunity for developed countries, for donor nations, for the multilateral development banks to come forward with further commitments as well. But the reason I say that I think we will get there with some confidence is that some of the assumptions that have been used in terms of the numbers produced by the OECD are quite conservative. For instance, on the private sector mobilization coming off the public finance. And I completely understand the reason for the projections that they have used. However, as I said, I think the delivery plan does show some confidence in terms of this quantum being delivered. Of course, As I said when we held a press conference on this delivery plan, I am disappointed that seems unlikely that the 100 billion will have been met in 2020. We don't yet have the figures. They will come next year from the OECD, but we do know the figures for 2021, just under 80 billion. And if you look at the delivery plan, the 100 billion is not likely to be met in 2021. That obviously is a matter for disappointment, but I do think the fact that from 2023 onwards, the 100 billion will be met, I think is positive. However, I'm also conscious of the fact that what matters is not just the quantum, but also the mix between adaptation and mitigation. And I've said very publicly in the past that what we cannot have is adaptation being seen as the poor cousin of mitigation going forward. There is a champions group of countries which is looking for more balance between adaptation and mitigation finance, and I hope other countries will join that. And also there is the issue of access to finance. I know that's particularly important for many developing nations. Back in March, I hosted a meeting of donor nations as well as developing countries and multilateral agencies. It was a climate and development ministerial that we held in March, and coming out of that was a task force that was set up jointly chaired by Fiji and the UK. We will be making further announcements on some pilot projects that will flow from that work, which I hope will also support the emphasis of improving access to finance. And sorry, just on the issue of, I think, transparency and people being able to see the work that is going on here. I mean, I want to thank Patricia for acknowledging the big efforts that have been made by the UK government, by my team, some of them are here, in putting together this event on a physical basis. And obviously, this is not a normal COP. As you can see, we're sitting here with masks on, there's social distancing, there is regular cleaning of rooms, we have daily testing regimes, and of course, the reason we have done that is twofold. One is, for me, it was vitally important that we have a physical meeting where every country is able to sit at the same table, the biggest emitters, together with the smallest nations, those in the front line of climate change, to be able to look each other in the eye as part of this negotiation. And the second reason is that for introducing these measures and continuing with a physical event is because we wanted to ensure that it was a safe event for everyone coming, but also for the people of Glasgow. I will ask Patricia, if she wouldn't mind, to talk a little bit about how we are organising the access to the negotiating rooms and also what scope there is in terms of virtual viewing of the work that is ongoing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And regarding this point about transparency and inclusion, you know that in our process, this has been one of the key principles to guide our process, that everybody needs to be included, everybody's voice, not only parties, by the way, but also other stakeholders. Now, as the President has just said, the fact is that we are meeting in very extraordinary circumstances. We have never organized a conference under circumstances similar, nothing, I mean, if you would have told me when I got this job in 2016 that we would be organizing a conference in this kind of situation, I would have thought that's impossible. So it is challenging, and I have to say, just like you, I think we are all trying to work out solutions while progressing and work out ways of making things happen. So one of the big challenges is the fact that while we have very big rooms, we have a very, very reduced capacity in the rooms. And you may know that in our process, sometimes the negotiation rooms get packed, people standing, some people even sitting on the floor. That happens. And this is something that we cannot allow to happen in the current circumstances. That is something that is not possible. So looking at the other challenge that we have is that we have a huge agenda. We are taking up mandates that were to be delivered in 2020, in 2021, and also those that were left pending from Madrid. So that means we really have a lot of work and very little time. We could not have negotiations before we came here. We did a lot of work, as many of you may know, virtually, but not negotiations. So we are faced with restrictions of capacity, not space, because really the spaces are incredible, but capacity of the rooms, and second, just an incredible amount of issues that need to be addressed. So that means that we need to try to take advantage of, fully take advantage of the fact that in the process we are allowed, let's say, parties have decided that there can be no more than 6 simultaneous negotiating process. So that means that we are trying to get those 6 process to be functioning permanently. And this is where then the restriction for access for in numbers, not for delegations, but the numbers. The biggest, for example, the biggest negotiating room has a capacity of 144, 72 persons at the table and 72 in the back. That is not enough. We have 193 parties now. So that is literally not enough. And then we have also the stakeholders, which we want to have included. We went through a lot of work with the UK colleagues in order to find also technical solutions in linking rooms so that while rooms would not be physically integrated, but they would be virtually integrated and allow people to also participate even if sitting in another room. So we are looking at all those different possibilities. You may have heard that we were exploring a possible ticketing system. We have heard a lot of reactions to that. We take all of that very seriously into account. So we are trying to find the best possible solution. We have told parties we are absolutely open to their proposals. And I do hope that, I do believe that later on today we will offer a possible solution, at least to try. And then, of course, if it doesn't work, we will need to go back and look at it again. But just to underline, the commitment with inclusiveness, inclusivity, and really transparency is absolutely there.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we don't have much time more, but the gentleman in row 3 here, over there, is next. And then the gentleman in row 4, you had your hand up for some time.
Hello, I have another question. Yeah, Alistair Thompson from Scoop Media, New Zealand. My question is about finance as well, and it addresses the question of sufficiency of the 100 billion in relation to the need. That seems to be grossly insufficient, and also when compared with the enormous amount of funding which was deployed to save the economies of America and Europe, it seems very, very small.
Thank you for that question. And obviously, the $100 billion goal was first talked about in 2009, and then it was reiterated in 2015 in Paris. I mean, what I would say is that I think we all understand that the 100 billion is a significant amount of money. However, report after report that we've seen internationally suggests that we're going to have to mobilize trillions of dollars a year to support the transformation of economies around the world. And I think this is where the private sector has a real role to play. And you will know that Mark Carney, who is Prime Minister Boris Johnson's private finance envoy when it comes to COP, has been working with colleagues in the UK government and others to ensure that we can mobilize the trillions of dollars from the private sector. You know, around a 100 trillion has been mobilized in the sense that the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which requires those who hold the finance to go to effectively net zero by 2050, that has been, there is around $100 trillion committed to that. Now, the issue is that how do you then connect that money to supporting developing countries? And there is a stream of work that is ongoing as part of the GFAN's work overall to look to see how private sector money can be mobilized better and more effectively in developing nations. And I do think that's very much part of the solution. I mean, if I may use a UK example, we in the UK have built the biggest offshore wind sector in the world over a relatively short period of time. And we are looking to quadruple the size of our offshore wind sector to 40 gigawatts by 2030. And the reason that we have been able to grow this so quickly is because we have also introduced various revenue mechanisms which have allowed the private sector to invest. And I think this is one way how countries that have achieved and have managed to get private sector investment in can also pass on that information, that knowledge sharing, that support to developing countries. So in summary terms, absolutely, to be able to do the transformational effects that we want across the global economy, it will require trillions, but I do think the private sector is wanting to and willing to step up to the plate. I suspect we will hear further announcements over these coming days from the private sector as well.
The gentleman here in row 4.
Jonathan Levy, Radio News Hub. I was at the Conference for Youth last night, attended by both the President and the Executive Secretary. They were very emotional and stated that this conference holds lives in their hands. Do you feel that pressure, and what do you say in response to those young people here and around the world today?
Well, I obviously we were both there, and Patricia will of course answer for herself. But there was a lot of energy in that room, and quite rightly, there was a challenge to me, there was a challenge to world leaders holding us to account. You know, we had a Youth for Climate event in Milan as well, which our Italian friends organized as part of pre-COP. And you know, it was very clear that young people are very worried about the future, and they're angry. And I think they have every right to be angry, because world leaders collectively over time have failed to deliver. Yes, we've made progress. Yes, we are bending the curve towards 2 degrees, but we need to go faster. And that's what young people are calling for. And you know, I pledged yesterday that I would do everything within my possibilities to ensure that we have success at COP26. But ultimately, this is for world leaders to help us deliver as well. They were the ones who made the commitments in Paris. They are the ones who are now being required to make the commitments and transform their own domestic economies. So, let's see what they come up with out of the G20 and, of course, what announcements come forward here at this COP. And the final thing I would say is that at the pre-COP in Milan, as ministers left that meeting, I did say to them that when they come to Glasgow and they think about the decisions that they're going to make, they must keep at the forefront of their minds the voices of the young people that they've heard, both in their own countries, but also internationally. And before they make any decisions, they should reflect on what those young people would think about those decisions. And that's the spirit with which I want these negotiations to be taken forward.
Well, on my side, it's actually the same kind of approach. To me, also representing the institution that is responsible to give continuity to this agenda. It is really a very a responsibility that I take very, very seriously, and in all my messages, even to the staff internally also, this is the point I make, because of course each person has one specific task assigned, and sometimes you can lose really the overall picture. Why are we doing this? What is it really that we are aiming for? I think the youth are worried. They are anxious. They are really under a lot of stress. This is a complicated world, very competitive world. Probably, if I think about my generation when I went out of university and started my life, my independent life, personally and professionally, I think they are already under a lot of stress, and I take that very seriously. So, but at the same time, I also tell them we need to work together. We cannot do it alone, and even the leaders cannot do it alone. We need them. We really need them to work with their leaders, and we need them also to continue raising their voice and holding their governments accountable, but also identifying in their everyday lives what is it that they can do. They are part of the solution, and there's great opportunities for them. I do think it's also important to give this sense of hope and forward-looking perspective for the youth.
Thank you. Next gentleman in row 2, and then we go back in the very last or almost last row to the, I think it's Daniela. Yeah.
Thank you. Eric Albert from Le Temps, a Swiss newspaper. How should we judge a success in 2 weeks' time? What would you really like to achieve? Maybe more to the President. Your government has talked about coal, cars, cash, trees, and sometimes methane. Is that the 5 baskets where you really want to move forward?
Yeah, thank you. Look, I mean, when we took on this role, we set out what our objectives were for COP26. The overarching objective that we had was that as we leave Glasgow, we need all of us, but particularly world leaders, to be able to say with credibility that we have kept 1.5 degrees within reach. And as part of delivering that, the Prime Minister, other colleagues in the UK system have been calling on countries around the world to come forward with commitments to cut emissions. So obviously they're NDCs, but also the net zero commitments as well. And I spoke about some of the progress that's been made there. We've asked countries to come forward with setting out plans on how they're going to adapt to the climate change that's already happening. And on the finance piece, of course, to come forward and deliver on the 100 billion. And, Jochen Flaschbart, Jonathan Wilkinson, I, and others have engaged, had significant engagement with donor countries and with multilateral development banks in the work that we did in producing the delivery plan. And I've set out where we've got to in terms of the finance piece. And the final piece was, of course, to ensure that we close off the Paris rulebook. And these are items that we have been discussing for 6 years. And I think it is perhaps very difficult for people to understand, people in our normal populations, for them to understand why it is taking so long to reach agreement on this rulebook. So I do think we need to close that off at this COP. In terms of coal, cars, cash, trees, and methane, yes, of course, those are our objectives. We talked about consigning coal to history, and I talked about the work that the UK has done in terms of helping to consign international coal finance to history. In terms of cars, the UK itself has said that there will be no more sale of new petrol and diesel cars from 2030. We're asking other countries to come forward with commitments to phase out petrol and diesel from 2035. I think we've seen some positive movements. If you look at the Fit for 55 package from the EU, I think effectively suggests that new car sales will be ultra-low emission from 2035. And again, if you look at what the US has said recently, 50% of new car sales to be ultra-low emission vehicles from 2030. Cash I've talked about, trees, looking particularly at ending deforestation. There is going to be a forest and land use event as part of the World Leaders Summit, and we will set out at that point what world leaders are signing up to. And then methane. As you know, there is a methane pledge which has been developed by the EU and the US, and that will be formally launched at COP. The UK is already signed up to this, but we have a pretty good record in the UK in terms of reducing methane. We've reduced it by 60% over the last 30 years and are putting in place further policies to curb methane emissions. So I think what we're trying to do is to tie up the negotiations with commitments from governments, but also commitments from the corporate sector and the non-state sector as well. And again, I think you will see at this COP further announcements that come forward from non-state actors.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, one more question. Here, the lady in the almost back. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniela Chiaretti from Valor Econômico, Brazil. I would like to know if you, so thanks for doing this, and I would like to know if you can tell us a little bit about the political declaration on forests that we know the presidency is trying to build on that, and also what we can expect on the private sector on forests. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for that question. You'll appreciate I'm not going to preempt the announcements as they come, but of course the overall intention is to ensure that we galvanize governments as well as non-state actors, which includes corporates, in the fight to stop deforestation. And indeed, what we would like to see is get to a point where we are reversing deforestation. I would just ask you to be a little patient for when the declarations come. You'll be able to see the full detail of what world leaders are signing up to, and obviously we will set out the details of who has actually signed up. May I just go back to the point about judging success? Of course, we've had commitments from governments in terms of curbing emissions. As I said, if you look at all the commitments and you add them up, you're heading towards 2 degrees. But what we're certainly going to have to do is to address the issue if there is a gap in where we need to be in terms of emissions reductions by the end of this decade, how are we going to close that ambition gap? Now, obviously, any conclusion that we arrive at will be done so on a consensus basis. But certainly I heard in London when I held a ministerial meeting bringing together around 50 governments and ministers, and then again at the pre-COP in Milan, there is a emerging consensus, particularly amongst the most climate vulnerable countries, is that perhaps countries may have to look again at their emission reduction targets if we are not going to be able to close the ambition gap on this occasion. I would describe COP26 as a really important league in a really important game rather in the league. There will be further COPs, but what is also clear is that this is the decisive decade, and that's why we need world leaders, we need countries, we need parties to come forward with some agreements at this COP on how we close the ambition gap.
Thank you. So we got to close at this point. Let me just give you a few numbers. On the registration side, we have 21,238 party members. These are the representatives from governments. 13,834 observers. 3,823 media representatives. So it's quite a large number. We have to follow the guidelines here. Thank you very much. It worked very well here so far. Let me also say tomorrow we have all the arrangements put in a document. You can find it in your email to know what to cover tomorrow. And also to announce the co-president has a daily slot at 1:45. Not during the leaders' events, but again then from Wednesday onwards, so here at the same place. And last but not least, Professor Tallas is already here. Next is WMO. You may want to stay here for the next press conference. So thank you very much and have a good 2 weeks. Thanks.